All right, I want to welcome everyone to this week's meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I am the chapter chair, Bruce McClure, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. So I want to start this week off by asking any of our participants here this evening if we have any news and notes from them on research or anything that they're doing. If not, I'm going to call somebody out. Ooh. Hey, Jeff, could you hit the unmute button for me for a second?
Sure thing.
And tell everybody a little bit about your podcast, would you?
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. It's called Baseball and BBQ, and we have interviews from both worlds. In fact, we just recorded this past Saturday. It's going to be out in a couple of weeks with Fred Clare of the former GM of the Dodgers, which was a fascinating interview. And we have coming up. Did you have Steven Steinberg on for Mike Donlin book?
Yes. Yep.
So he's going to be he's going to be released this week on Saturday. We release every Saturday, so just check us out on all your podcast apps, Baseball and BBQ.
That is right. You can catch them on just about every podcatcher out there. So if you are listening to baseball podcasts, grab that one too. It's a great listen. Joe Ross, you're up.
It never occurred to me to mention it before, but I think, obviously, I do the email feature of Today in Baseball History, which has the unusual and the weird stuff that goes, and it's available to everybody. And it just occurred to me that since most of the people who are listening or participating, I assume, are SABR members, that I should tell you the normal price is $15.95. But for SABR members, if you tell me you're a SABR member, when you send me $10, you're in. $10 a year for every single day's program goes out at 8 a.m. Eastern time. And I think it's pretty good. Bruce, you can tell everybody it's wonderful since you get it.
It is. And it's like you could set your watch by at 8 o'clock every morning. You'll get it in your inbox and you will read a lot about baseball history. It's a nice little way to, at least for me, it's a nice little way to start my day.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, Joe. Thank you. I want to get into some SABR news for just a moment. A historical database of Major League Baseball team employees covering more than 40,000 people dating back to the late 19th century is now available online through SABR's Business of Baseball Committee. I was doing so good. There we go. The SABR MLB team employee database offers a new lens into Major League front and back offices, from team owners to ticket sales. You can access this database at frontoffice.sabr.org today. I got into it just a few minutes ago before I started this meeting, and it is extensive and it is very easy to use. So check that out. Now, don't forget, on September 28th, our in-person meeting here in New London, New Hampshire at our home with SABR member, author, and titan of sports journalism, Melissa Lutke. We are so excited. She's going to be discussing her new book, Locker Room Talk, A Woman's Struggle to Get Inside. We'll have some ballpark food and an afternoon of great baseball talk. You are not going to want to miss this if you are in the local area. So for more information, please email me at bruce@brucemcclurenh.com. All right.
I have one.
Go ahead.
The Springfield chapter, Springfield, Mass, the Rabbit Moranville chapter is going to host Dwight Evans in the flesh on Saturday, September 14th, with his co-author Eric Sherman of the recent Dewey Behind the Gold Glove, and all are invited. All are welcome.
So check that out in the SABR events calendar. You will see on September 14th, correct, Carl? Did I hear that correct? You cut out for a second. Dwight Evans is going to be there in person. I haven't read this new biography yet, but the reviews that I'm reading about it are very, very good. You're going to want to check that out if you're
Bruce, you can actually hear the interview with Eric Sherman in a few weeks on my podcast as well. We had him on, and it was fantastic. It is a great book.
Oh, there you go. There you go. All right, anybody else before I get going? All right, here we go. Josh Gibson first set foot in a big league park as a 19-year-old in 1930 as a member of the Homestead Grays. Over the course of the next 16 years, he hit at least one home run in 17 of the big league ballparks in which he played, including a very noteworthy homer in the Bronx. Gibson hit homers in more than 90 ballparks, large and small. His first Yankee Stadium homer came on September 27th. The second of those shots was said to have gone completely out of the ballpark. The fact is that nobody had ever hit a home run to the distant left center field bleachers before Gibson, and few after. Alan Cohen discusses how, although Gibson's home run feats at big league ballparks were impressive, his legend was cemented wherever he played. Alan Cohen chairs the SABR Bio Project Fact-Checking Committee, is a member of the Smokey Joe Wood chapter in Connecticut, is a datacaster, MILB stringer, with the Hartford Yard Goats, the AA affiliate of the Colorado Rockies. He volunteers with the Retro Sheet Negro Leagues Project and with SABR's Negro League Committee. His biographies, game stories, and essays have appeared in more than 70 baseball-related publications, and he is here tonight to give his Malloy Conference presentation entitled Josh Gibson Blazes a Trail Through Big League Ballparks. Alan Cohen, I cannot thank you enough for being here. How are you?
Okay, thank you. And hello, everybody. I have given this presentation a couple of times, so I give a different presentation each time so as not to bore myself. But anyhow, should we share the screen now or not, Bruce?
It is all yours, my friend. You can share your screen, and I'm just going to step aside.
There we go. There we go. Could everybody see it? Yep. Okay. Josh Gibson blazes a trail. There we go. This is Josh Gibson rounding third base and heading towards home during the 1937 season when he was with the Homestead Grays. Josh Gibson played with two teams, the Pittsburgh Crawfords and the Homestead Grays. He played in two home ballparks that were big league ballparks. One was Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, another Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C., arguably the two most difficult ballparks in which to hit a home run during his time or any other time. Here's what Jimmy Powers said. Jimmy was a writer with the New York Daily News for many years. For batting exhibit A, I give you the unbelievable Josh Gibson catcher for the Homestead Grays. Josh missed immortality and a chance to endorse breakfast food by being born on the wrong side of the social structure. Ask McManus at Yankee Stadium if Josh didn't haul off and smite the longest ball ever to take flight in the park's history. A commercial air pilot says the ball whizzed past him over Bellefontaine, Pennsylvania, took a bad hop on a thundercloud, and broke one of St. Peter's window panes. Such hyperbole is not unusual in talking about Josh Gibson. So, myth, majesty, and mystery. Josh Gibson hit the only fair ball completely out of Yankee Stadium. Did he? It was that home run that was just mentioned. Josh Gibson hit two fair balls completely out of Griffith Stadium. Did he? And in one season at 1943, he hit more home runs than were hit by the 7 visiting American League teams combined. Did he? He homered in every big league ballpark in which he played. He played in 20 of them. Did he? Josh Gibson hit 800 home runs. It says so on his Hall of Fame plaque. Did he? Even his first appearance was somewhat a mystery. For the record, the home run count for Josh Gibson is currently 394, and it is likely to stay there for a while. I do think we will find more ultimately. In 1943, Gibson had 10 homers at Griffith Stadium in 38 games, but the visiting AL teams, because of a rush at the end of the year, made it to 14. However, the Washington Senators had only 9, so he beat the Washington Senators then. He had 29 career home runs in approximately 160 games at Griffith Stadium. Only one went completely out of the ballpark. He led the Negro National League in home runs 11 times. Per Seamheads, he had 246 home runs. And his all-inclusive career batting average was 366 in 939 games. Was it? Answers to all the other questions will come as we take a tour through the ballparks in which Gibson played and had home runs. I might add the gap between 246 and 394 is mainly due to that Seamheads only uses games for which they have a box score or a scorecard. Many of Gibson's home runs came in games against other Negro League teams. There was just a game story, and Seamheads doesn't have it. Also, Gibson had many games against semi-pro teams. Here's the itinerary, so you know where we're going. All the way from, we're going to start at Forbes Field. We're going to end up in Comiskey Park. We have a number of stops in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. So let us begin at home for Josh Gibson. With the Homestead Grays in 1930, legend has it that he came out of the stands to replace Buck Ewing, who had been injured early in the contest on July 25th, 1930. By the way, that was a night game. It was the second night game in the history of Forbes Field, both Negro League games. It was also said that he was in the dugout in street clothes prior to that game. And some say it was another game. Well, nobody really knows when he made his debut, but for our purposes, it was July 25th, 1930, when Homestead beat the Kansas City Monarchs in his first game. August 22nd, 1930 was Josh Gibson's first home run with the Grays. It was on the road at a neutral park. It was against Albert Davis of the Detroit Stars, and they were playing at League Park in Akron, which was the AAA ballpark for many years. September 13th, 1930 was Josh Gibson's first homer at Forbes Field. He homered twice in a doubleheader that day. And he had 9 homers in 1930. His most recent 1930 homer was discovered by our friends at Seamheads. It was a game on September 15th of 30, and the print of the newspaper article is barely legible if you go searching for it on newspapers.com. Just hard to find. During his career, he homered 14 times at Forbes Field. Well, at the end of the 1930 season, the independent Homestead Grays played against the independent New York Lincoln Giants. They built it as a World Series of sorts. They played 10 games against each other, starting at Forbes Field. The Grays won both games at Forbes Field. In the opener, Oscar Charleston, who was the player-manager of the Grays, homered, and Josh Gibson homered. And he homered and tripled, I should say, in the second game that the Grays won. The team split a doubleheader at Yankee Stadium on September 21st. Gibson had 2 hits and 7 at-bats, no home runs. But in a matter of days, and he was only 18 at the time, he hit 2 thunderous home runs. First one at September 25th was at Bigler Field, located 13th at Bigler in Philadelphia. According to the Philadelphia Tribune, the ball cleared the left field fence and even the roofs across Bigler Street. 2 days later, he was at Yankee Stadium. for games 5 and 6 of the series. Games 8 and 9 of the series. Gibson hit the longest home run that has been hit at Yankee Stadium by any player, white or colored, all season. That's the article that was in the black newspapers. I saw it in the Baltimore Afro-American. There is no conclusive evidence, however, that that ball went clearly out of Yankee Stadium. Indications are that it landed in the rear of the bleachers and either bounced into the visitors' bullpen or over the rear fence and out of the ballpark completely. The long home run at the big ballpark. The Grays won the second game of that doubleheader on September 27th, and they were up after that 5-3 with 2 games left in the series. In the first inning of the second game against Connie Rector, Gibson hit the home run into the bleachers in center field. It was his 4th home run of the 10-game postseason series and his 2nd at Yankee Stadium. His first came in the first game of that doubleheader, which was lost by the Grays. The home run in game 2 was the longest ball ever hit at Yankee Stadium. The sign before the bleachers has it at 450 feet. So it's just to clear the fence and go into those bleachers at 450 feet. If you're of a certain age, you remember seeing Al Gianfrido rob Joe DiMaggio of a home run in the World Series. I think it was 47. And again, that was a shorter blow. That was only 402 feet out to left field. Gibson hit the ball to center field. The shift against Josh Gibson was to play him up the middle with the entire team. On September 28th, by the way, the Grays won the championship at Yankee Stadium. The Yankees were on the road completing the season in Boston that day with Babe Ruth pitching. During his career, Josh Gibson homered 7 times at Yankee Stadium. And I know it's early to be doing counting, but that's ballpark number 2. Now we're going to go to Griffith Stadium in D.C. In the early years, there weren't that many games played at D.C. His first appearance was June 28th, 31. He homered against Montague. And the Grays defeated Hilldale 5-2. Hilldale's a Philadelphia team. He played there only twice, but he had that one home run in 1931. He went to the Pittsburgh Crawfords in 1932, and he homered at Griffith Stadium with the Crawfords in 1932. It was his only game of the year there, setting a pattern. Josh Gibson could appear at a ballpark once, and he hit a home run there. It was phenomenal. And we'll see that throughout this. He was with the Crawfords from 32 to 36. In 1937, Satchel Paige took pretty much the whole team, anybody who was any good, to the Dominican Republic. The Crawfords traded Gibson to the Homestead Grays, who were also in Pittsburgh, just outside of Pittsburgh. During his last 5 seasons, 1942 through 1946, the Grays used Griffith Stadium for their Sunday games and also some games during the week. And we'll get to Griffith Stadium more later on. The next stop is Cleveland. Cleveland Stadium, otherwise known as the Mistake by the Lake. The first baseball game played there was between the Grays and the Monarchs. The Grays won on August 30th. Then on October 4th, a team with the best players from the Grays and the Crawfords played in Cleveland Stadium against a team of white players advertised as the American League All-Stars. I think that's pushing it. The team was organized by Steve O'Neill, who had been a catcher, retired 5 years at that point. I think maybe 3 or 4 players on that team had played in the American League. They were not all-stars. A few others were minor league players, and many were just semi-pro players. So the score was 18-0. but Gibson hit the first 2 home runs in the history of Cleveland Stadium, bringing his count to 4 ballparks. And there was another ballpark in Cleveland. League Park was occupied. Even the Indians played in League Park after Cleveland Stadium was built for a number of years. They only played in Cleveland Stadium on rare occasions. Gibson, on July 23rd, 1933, he homered at League Park to tie the game, and the Crawfords won in 12 innings, 13-12. In that game, Josh Gibson hit for the cycle, 2 singles, a double, a triple, and the home run. He also walked in the game, and he was up to 5 ballparks. Philadelphia had a few ballparks in which Josh Gibson homered. 2 were major league ballparks. Baker Bowl was the home of the Philadelphia Phillies from 1895 through 1938. Most black games in Philadelphia were played at Parkside Field, and that's where most of them were held, or Passman Field at 48th and Spruce. The Crawfords first played at the Baker Bowl on July 10th, 1934. On August 20th of 34, in the first game of a doubleheader, Gibson hit 2 home runs, and he drove in 7 in an 8-2 win. And he was now up to 6 ballparks. Ebbets Field, home of the Dodgers, and for 1 year, the Brooklyn Eagles. Aben Effamanley, who's in the Hall of Fame, the only woman in the Hall of Fame. The Eagles played at Ebbets Field in 1935. Gibson played there with the Crawfords, and on July 14th, 35, he hit a home run when the Crawfords defeated the Eagles in the first game of a doubleheader. He was up to 7 ballparks. As for the Eagles, they moved to Newark in 1936, and they had some great players in Newark, one of which was Monty Irvin. I mention Monty Irvin because we're talking home runs, and as prolific as Josh Gibson was, Josh Gibson never hit 3 home runs in 3 different ballparks on the same day. Monty Irvin did that in 1940 in Ohio. 3 different games, I should say, 2 different ballparks. In 1935, the Crawfords won the pennant. We have a SABR book on the 1935 Crawfords, if any of you are interested. We do a book a year on Negro League teams. Our most recent book was on the 1939 Baltimore Elite Giants. Our next book is on the 1945 Cleveland Buckeyes. Will come out next year. In 1935, Gibson hit in another big league ballpark. It was Borchert Field in Milwaukee. Now, that's a stretch, I know, because Borchert Field had been used for 20 games back in the 19th century by the American Association Brewers. And after that, it was used for minor league games. Josh Gibson hit his homer there on August 28th, 35 against the American Giants. And that brought his count to 8 big league ballparks. We're almost halfway there. He was back with the Grays in 1937, except for 5 weeks where he went to the Dominican Republic with the team's permission to play with Satchel Paige's team in the Dominican. After those 5 weeks, he came back. The Grays, during the time he was with them, actually from 1937 through 45, the Grays won 8 times the Negro League pennant in 9 seasons. In 37, he added 2 ballparks to the list of big league ballparks. And each of those ballparks, like Borchert Field, was a big league ballpark long before he played in them. These are the pictures. American Giants Park in Chicago, where the Chicago White Sox played prior to Comiskey Park, and Oriole Park in Baltimore, which looks nothing like its current namesake, but this was Oriole Park number 4, originally called Terrapin Park, built in 1914 and for the Federal League team. So we'll talk about first American Giants Park in Chicago, and the White Sox played there from 1901 till 1910. When the White Sox left, the local black team moved into the ballpark. It was called American Giants Park, or Pohl's American Giants Ballpark. He hit a home run there on August 29, 37, off of Willie Cornelius, and he also tripled, and the Grays won. He was up to 9 ballparks, but a couple of weeks later, he'd add the ballpark in Baltimore. The Negro League games were played at Oriole Park, but most of the black games were played at Bugle Field. And frankly, there is no marking at Bugle Field, its current location, commemorating the Negro League presence there. There are markers at all the other ballparks in Baltimore, as we found out at the convention a couple of years ago, but not at Bugle Field. On September 26, 37, they played 2 games at the year-end series between the Grays and Chicago. In the first game, Gibson homered and tripled, but the Grays lost the game. They did win the series, and he was up to 10 big league ballparks. In 1938, this was another old major league ballpark, Offerman Stadium in Buffalo. It was originally called Olympic Park and later Buffalo Baseball Park, and the Players League team used that for their home team games. That was in 1890. He first played there with the Crawfords in 1936, but he didn't homer there until August 3, 1938, in a win over the Eagles. All he did that day was a single, 2 doubles, and the 2 home runs. And he was up to 11 ballparks. How did Josh do in New York City? Well, there were 3 ballparks in New York when Gibson played, and I must say I was to each of them. He hit 7 homers at Yankee Stadium, as we mentioned. His second and last homer at Ebbets Field came in 1942. The Polo Grounds. His first Polo Grounds homer came on July 25th, 1943, against the Philadelphia Stars, and he had 4 homers in all at the Polo Grounds. He was up to 12 ballparks. But when we're talking about New York City, New York was the capital of baseball with semi-pro teams playing all over. Dyckman Oval was the home of the New York Black Yankees before they moved into Yankee Stadium. Dexter Park, which was on the Brooklyn-Queens border, that was used by Negro League teams. It was also used by the Brooklyn Bushwicks. And there was Farmers Stadium, Erasmus Field, and the Sherwood Oval, all fielding great semi-pro teams, and they welcomed the Negro League teams there all the time. Indeed, the death of the Negro Leagues contributed to the death of the Brooklyn Bushwicks in New York. But there is more to the story in New York. And as I said, Josh Gibson homered at 8 different ballparks, and they are all gone. How about Chicago? Well, you've already heard about Cole's American Ballpark, but you know about those other 2 ballparks. North side is Wrigley Field, south side is Comiskey Ballpark, and Josh hit homers at each of those 2 ballparks. Beautiful Wrigley Field. This is a little more current picture than when Josh played there. And he only played there once. August 29th, 1943, he homered against Satchel Paige of the Kansas City Monarchs. They had been battery mates in Pittsburgh with the Crawfords. He now had homered in 13 different ballparks. But Comiskey Park, although he played there often, he never homered there until very late in his career. But we're going to go and visit Philadelphia's Shibe Park. Now, Shibe Park, not that many games were played there. It wasn't during the time Gibson played there near the black fan base. And starting in 1938, Shibe Park was home to both the Phillies and the Athletics, so there weren't many opportunities to play there. On July 18, 1944, Gibson hit a 3-run homer at Shibe Park, and as the Grays defeated the Elite Giants. Josh Gibson was up to 14 homers. Now, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that Gibson had now homered in each big league ballpark in which he had played. It was while doing our book on Shibe Park that I saw that article, and that interested me in this whole research that I've been doing now since 2020 on Josh Gibson. This is the scorecard. We don't get to see too many scorecards, but this is the scorecard from July 18th, 44, the Homestead Grays and the Baltimore Elite Giants. And if you look on the left side, you see a little star next to Gibson's name. His home run came in the first inning. Now, I'm not expecting you to know too many of these guys, but Buck Leonard was batting fourth that day. Usually Gibson batted ahead of Leonard in the batting order, but that day Leonard hit ahead of him. Dave Hoskins, who later played in the majors, he was on the Homestead Grays at the time. For the Baltimore Elite Giants, if you go to the fourth player is their catcher. And they spelled his name wrong, not unusual. Roy Campanello was the catcher for the Baltimore Elite Giants on July 18th, 1944. When Gibson played, we talk about Alabama. So it wasn't 17 ballparks, because somebody asked me at the Malloy conference, did he ever hit one at Brickwood Field? So I, without thinking about it, said, of course. Well, he did. The Birmingham Black Barons were a force in the Negro American League from 1937 through 1960, and they played at Brickwood Field. However, during Gibson's years, they didn't travel much in the South. The Negro Leagues played in the industrialized North for most of the teams. Gibson homered at Brickwood Field on September 17th, 44, and of course, this past year, it became a big league ballpark for one day. Gibson's ballpark count was now 15. And I can't forget the Motor City. I was thinking about that song, Dancing in the Streets, and how many home cities in that song Gibson homered it, and there were quite a few, including the Motor City. Now, no games involving black players were held at Riggs Stadium until the 1940s. Gibson played there for the first time on September 4th, 1944, but details of the games are not available. This is unfortunately the case with many of our Negro League games, where there might be a brief article. Box scores are available for maybe half the games, if that. He played there, though, on June 3rd, 1945, and he homered as the Grays defeated Baltimore in the second game of a doubleheader. That brings us to 16. Sportsman's Park in St. Louis, another ballpark where you rarely had Negro League ball. In fact, the stands at Sportsman's Park was segregated until something around 1942. And the owner of the St. Louis Cardinals, Fred Say, who owned them from 1947 or so to 1953, never signed a black for the entirety of the St. Louis organization. That only happened after Bush took over. Sportsman Park was the home to the St. Louis Browns, of course, of the American League. They were the landlord, and the Cardinals of the National League. Gibson's first and only games there were on July 9th. And the crowd was 19,774. The doubleheader was delayed by rain. In the first game, he had 4 hits, but no home run. He homered early in the second game, and it was up to 17 ballparks. So what's left? Comiskey Park. He played there often. His teams played against the Chicago American Giants, who used that as their home ballpark after Cole's American Ballpark was knocked down. He played there in 9 East-West games. He had 29 at bats. He had 483 batting average, which is stupendous, but he never had a home run there. In 1938, he hit a ball to dead center field by the flagpole, but it didn't go out. On July 21, 1946, in a game against the Chicago American Giants, Gibson homered there in the 6th inning to tie the game, and the Grays won it 9-7. And that's 18 ballparks. Leaves us with 2 ballparks. First is Crossley Field, I should say, in Cincinnati, famous for its sloped outfield. We are not certain if he homered there. We don't have the details of the games. The Cincinnati Enquirer did not put details or box scores in. Now, Leo DeRocher said that Gibson homered there in a barnstorming game in the 30s, but there are scant details. It is said he homered there on October 4th, 1933, but again, we have yet to find details of the game. That was a barnstorming game. And he might have homered there in August of 1943 when the Grays defeated the Atlanta Black Crackers 14-6 in an exhibition game. But again, the details are missing. Then we have Muhlenbach Field in Kansas City. He played there before it became a big league ballpark. The Grays played the Kansas City Monarchs in 1930, and they barnstormed throughout Pennsylvania and Ohio, and then they made it to Kansas City, playing 3 games there. The Grays won each game, but Gibson did not homer. The only other time he played there was the 1942 Negro League World Series, and he did not homer then either. And of course, Muhlenbach Stadium became Kansas City Municipal Stadium, and the Kansas City A's played there for 13 years, beginning in 1955. Since 1995, of course, Kansas City has been home to the Negro League Baseball Museum. In the next couple of slides, we're going to do a little bit more about Griffith's production. At Griffith Stadium, he hit his home run there on his last home run came there on September 15th, 46. It was his 29th home run, and he played an approximate 163 games there. His production of 1 homer per 5.62 games is slightly less than Babe Ruth, who had 34 home runs in 171 games, or 1 per 5.03. I did a little digging, and the most prolific there was not a Hall of Famer, Rocky Colavito. He had 24 homers there in 57 games, or 1 per 2.375 games. Mickey Mantle was next on the list. And here are some others. Joe DiMaggio, 1 per 4.17. Killebrew had 41 homers there, 1 per 4.8. And then Roy Severs, it was his home ballpark, 91 homers. Jimmy Fox. Ted Williams was less prolific than Gibson, as was Lou Gehrig. This is something, 1938, and this is one place we just don't have details. Josh Gibson homered 4 times in a game against the Memphis Red Sox in Zanesville, Ohio, on July 28, 1938. And I will say this, the Hall of Fame now shows amongst the players with 4 home runs in a game, Josh Gibson for that game, although we never have found the box score. And in the article that I have here, it says, in a season, Gibson collected an average of 10 four-baggers each week. Well, that's ridiculous on its face. But what they meant to say, we're in the world of what they meant to say. The truth is that from July 23rd through July 30th, Gibson homered 10 times in 9 games, which is pretty darn good. The barrage began in Monessen, Pennsylvania. He homered in Dayton, Zanesville, Greensburg, and Middletown, Pennsylvania. The Homestead Grays played at Forbes Field and Griffith Stadium and pretty much everywhere in between. In 1943, that was one heck of a season for Gibson. I'd have to take several pages to tell you all about it, but these are a few things. He had his 10 home runs in 38 games. He had more home runs than the Washington Senators. They only had 9. His batting average that year was 466 in 70 regular season games. That is the all-time record high for one season. He drove in 112 runs. That's players have enough difficulty doing that in a full season. He did it in 70 games. He had 25 home runs in 1943. And where else did he play? Well, he played at Greenlee Field. Gus Greenlee built that ballpark for the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and they played there from 1932 through 38. When the Crawfords left town, Josh Gibson hit 31 homers at Greenlee Field, more than any other ballpark. He played there. I think I didn't say it here. He played there about 170 games. He homered in 101 ballparks in all. I don't think anybody else has homered in that many ballparks. And a significant number of his homers came at night, as the Negro League adopted night baseball long before the AL and NL did. Indeed, the Brooklyn team, the Brooklyn Eagles, they played a night game there in 1935, was the first night game in the history of Ebbets Field. And pitching in that game at Ebbets Field, by the way, was Grover Cleveland Alexander. He was barnstorming with the House of David. Gibson's last year was 1946. As I noted, his last homer came on September 15th at Griffith Stadium, and we don't have an accurate count of his home runs. Seam says he has 246, including 44 in the Mexican League, where he played in 1940 and 1941. He hit many home runs. We have 394 in all, and that count includes his home runs in the Dominican Republic, his home runs in Cuba, his home runs in Puerto Rico, where he won a very big trophy in the 1939-1940 season. Per seam heads, his all-inclusive career batting average was 366 in 939 games. Now, per Baseball Reference, his all-time regular season average is a record 373, beating Ty Cobb. Or is it? Well, according to SABR, well, let's take a look at Seamhead's record. I've highlighted yellow. The total for 17 seasons, starting in 1930 with the Homestead Grays, and going through 1936. EAS is the Eastern All-Stars. So this includes the All-Star games, the East-West games. It includes the Negro League World Series. So you see in 1943 there, it says multiple. Yeah, he wasn't with multiple. He was with the Grays all year. But he was also with the East-West All-Stars and the North-South All-Stars and the Grays in the Negro League World Series. Well, Baseball Reference, and now MLB, has him with a 373 batting average. However, If you take a look at 1930, we only have him for one game in 1930. That was a game he played with the Memphis Red Sox. His games from 1930 with the Grays are not there. His games with 31 with the Grays, not there. And his games from 1932 with the Crawfords, not there. SABR has deemed the Homestead Grays of 1930 and 1931 to be Major League, and the Crawfords of 1932 to be Major League. So each and every regular season game played by Josh Gibson is now a Major League game. So what happens to his 373 average? Well, in the games excluded from the current Baseball Reference regular season database, he only hit 328. 374 in 1930 in only 32 games. He was only there for part of the season. 312 in 1931 and 321 in 1932. So his combined average overall is now 364. I do not know what the situation is going to be between seam heads, retro sheet, Baseball Reference, and SABR in getting us all onto the same page with not only Josh Gibson's stats, but the stats from 1949 and 50 of Willie Mays, the stats from 1950 of Ernie Banks. Oh, by the way, Hank Aaron, 1952, his stats will never be out there because nobody considers the 1952 Negro Leagues a major league. But Hank Aaron in 1952, in a month with the Indianapolis Clowns, had himself one heck of a time. He batted .374 with 5 home runs and something like 32 RBIs. And I believe that brings us to the end of the tour and a few notes about Josh Gibson. Thank you. Any questions?
A few notes is an understatement, Alan. That was a lot of notes, and it was fantastic. If you have a question for our presenter, Alan Cohen, here this evening, go down to the bottom of your screen and hit the react button and then hit raise hand. And we're going to get you in to ask questions of our presenter this evening. I know Eric Zweig wanted to, and he's got his hand up too. So we'll get you in second. Jeff, unmute, and you are up.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Alan, for that presentation. I put my hand up really early during the presentation, and you answered the questions toward the end there, so I appreciate that. I do have a couple of questions, though. You mentioned minor league stadiums. Were they major league dimensions? I mean, were the dimensions a major league standard?
I don't know on that what the story was with the dimensions in those minor league ballparks. But remember, I think I mentioned it, Josh Gibson did not pull the ball down the left field line. His home runs were to center field. That is, we had a trivia question at the Negro League Malloy Conference that was asked in the finals. And they said they had a shift. I think it was the Grays put a shift on against him when he was with the Crawfords. And basically, the third baseman went to short center field. The second baseman and the shortstop congregated around second base. The outfielders all merged. So it was up the middle. They played him. So that's one of the reasons he didn't hit as many home runs as some others who would have hit it down the line. It was straight and deep, and that's where he hit them. So even minor league ballparks, it would be deeper to center field.
Gotcha. And one last question: did he have hit one at Hinchcliffe Stadium in New Jersey?
He hit several at Hinchcliffe Stadium in New Jersey. Hold everything. Hopefully you cannot see this, but if you do, you do. All right.
You are not sharing right now, Alan, so you're safe.
Okay, I know. I don't want to be sharing. Gibson by Ballpark. Okay. Okay. Hinchcliffe Stadium in Paterson, New Jersey. I think he had about 5 home runs there. And they were all against Negro League opponents. Many Negro League team games were played there against the likes of the Newark Eagles or the New York Black Yankees. So he did homer there quite often.
Great. And one last note that he passed away early at 35. I mean, how many more, terrible.
Am I on here now?
You are not
Okay.
sharing your screen, but you're here, my friend.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hold on a second. If I can see this thing.
You should be seeing everybody here right now. What do you need, Alan?
Let me just. There we go. I can see everybody now.
Okay.
Thank you. Little technical difficulties. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No problem. He passed away a relatively young man at
Yes, he did.
35. God knows how many more, how much longer of a career he could have had. That's all I wanted to state.
He was injured quite a bit, frankly, in his last few years. 1942, he missed it. He missed an opportunity in 1942 to homer at Fenway Park. The Grays played a game at Fenway Park, but his backup catcher, Mr. Gaston, who may or may not be related to Cito Gaston, we don't know. Gaston had the game-winning hit in that game.
Mhm.
So, but he did not get to play in Braves Field, however, in Boston.
No, me or you may or may not be related either. So
that's true.
thank you, Bruce.
Absolutely, my friend. Next up is Eric. I'm going to blow this name. Eric Zweig. Eric Zweig, you're up, my friend. Thank you for
I
saving.
actually have 2 questions now. I had one question that I'd sent to Bruce, and then towards the end of your presentation, it brought another one. What, like in May, when all these statistics were sort of published, Josh Gibson's average was said to be 372. That didn't look like any of the numbers you had
No, 373 is the number that
because
Baseball Reference has.
Yeah.
And that's right there with the number that MLB has.
Right,
As
because
I'm
all the news
saying,
stories,
though,
all the news stories in May, and I'm looking at a bunch of them, say 372, but
Yeah,
it should be 373.
I think it should be 373. And the thing is, if they wind up including those years that SABR has said are now major, then it would go down to 364.
Right, which is interesting because
We have yet to really. The book is not nowhere near closed on the research into the Negro Leagues.
No, I'm sure it isn't.
That's
Sorry.
The main regret I have or see in all of this is the Negro League research did not really begin until July of 1966, which was a singular important moment. I don't know how many of you know what happened at that day. It was in Cooperstown. Ted Williams said it's time to recognize Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, and the other Negro League players. To that point, there had been very little, if any, scholarship on the Negro Leagues. Buck O'Neill's stories were not being widespread. Buck was still working with the Cubs as a scout and a coach. So it wasn't until then that Peterson got going with his book that came out in 1970, Hallway with his books and interviews, and most of those early books, a lot was oral history. The stats, we really didn't get going on that until Seamhead started doing their thing back in the 1990s. And now RetroSheet is doing its thing. And I don't know when we'll finish it, hopefully in my lifetime, but I don't think so. We're in 1937 right now. When I get off here, I believe I'm somewhere in August 20th, I believe, of 1937. And we'll be posting 1938 and 1937, in addition to the years from 1939 through 49, which are already out there on the Retro Sheet site. And I ask any of you to see the game-by-game stuff, and we are trying to get as much deduced play-by-play stuff as we can on those Negro League games.
Well, then my actual question, and I guess that it's sort of, I've found the answer and you've kind of hinted at the answer, is that I guess it's not considered professional, or it's certainly not considered major league. His 1929 season, when he was playing with the Pittsburgh Crawfords, which very rarely seems to even get mentioned anywhere that he played that year.
Yeah. In 1929, the Pittsburgh Crawfords were really a lower level semi-pro team. They won a ton of games, don't get me wrong. But this was the pre-Gus Greenlee Pittsburgh Crawfords.
Okay.
He did not get involved in the with the Crawfords until 1931. And it was in 1931 that Gus Greenlee of the Crawfords raided anywhere he could to get players. So his 1931 Crawford team was very good. And Josh Gibson became part of the Crawfords in 1932, which was also the year the ballpark opened up. So it was a different Crawfords team, winning a lot, but a local thing. Gibson was known. He didn't
I saw
come
an
out of the
article
stands. The Grays were signing him up.
Yeah,
There
he was
no
already
issue.
being called the Babe Ruth of Pittsburgh in 1929. So,
Yeah.
He'd made a reputation already.
All right, let's keep it going. Glenn Vassy, you're up, my friend. How you doing, Glenn?
Hello, I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Alan, for a good presentation. You had mentioned Bugle Field in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And there's no marker do you know, is there a group of SABR members that are working to place a marker there at this point?
I don't know. I could check with Peter down there about it. It's a very active chapter. I sat with Tom Schresch of Retro Sheet. That was the day I first met him, was on the bus tour of the old ballparks in Baltimore, and we were a little surprised that Bugle Field was not part of the tour. But it was not close to any of the other ballparks, and at that time there was no commemoration of the ballpark.
Okay.
I don't know what the chapter's doing.
Thank you.
Very surprised there's not a marker there. Karen Holleran, you are up. How you doing, Karen?
Fine. I really like this topic and talk. I was wondering, did you find all this information also at the Pittsburgh Heinz Center?
Did I find the information what?
Did you find information at the Pittsburgh Heinz Center?
Oh, no. I unfortunately, I did not go to the Heinz Center when we were there in Pittsburgh. The only side trip I took in Pittsburgh was to the Clemente Museum, which was very rewarding. Most of what I find is online. I subscribe to newspapers.com. I am able to get access to ProQuest, where I get the black newspaper. Of course, SABR now has them. Genealogybank.com is a good source for newspapers. So that's where I find the stuff. I might recommend to those of you involved in looking up Negro League stats, Leighton Revel's site at the Center for Negro League Baseball Research down in Texas. He just redid his site, and he did a great job redoing it. It's a heck of a lot more accessible than it once was, and easy to move around there to get the stats that he has.
Okay, well, thank
We
you.
have a long way to go. Tom finds the articles for us for Retro Sheet.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Joe Ross, how you doing?
Okay. Alan, first, thank you. It was a great program. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Second, I have one sort of general question. With all the games that you're looking at, how does Major League Baseball and SABR and Baseball Reference or any of the other groups determine which games are really major league games and which games aren't. For instance, as you know, the Boston Red Sox play Northeastern University at spring training. They usually win, but I wouldn't call that a major league game.
No. I'd say we are using basically a similar thing to what the majors would use. The Negro Leagues had a schedule. They didn't always play every game because they had some travel issues, but they had regularly scheduled games, just like the big leagues. They had a spring training. Those games are exhibitions. We at Retro Sheet label each game, whether it's an exhibition game or a regular season game, and it's clearly noted in the articles. Sometimes during the season, a game, even between Negro League teams, would be an exhibition. Often, if it's in the middle of nowhere in a city that usually wouldn't have baseball, they go there to play an exhibition during the week. But every weekend, those were Negro League games. They were played, many of them in the big league ballparks, as I mentioned, and many of the games during the week that were played at minor league games or places like Paterson, New Jersey. They were major league games and they were clearly labeled as such. There was not an issue as to whether a game was a Negro League game or an exhibition game.
What about
Thank heavens.
What if they're playing in a field that we would consider a minor league field at best? Does that affect?
If you have two Negro League teams and during the week they would play at minor league ballparks, Josh Gibson's 101 home runs, most of them were Negro League games. There were a few that were exhibition games. There were a few against semi-pro teams, but most were, say, at Akron, Ohio, Paterson, New Jersey, and other what we would consider minor league ballparks. They were very major league, the games and the competition.
Now, if they're playing a semi-pro team, that gets considered a major league game?
No, not at
okay.
all. If they're playing a semi-pro team, in fact, semi-pro games against semi-pro teams, you will not see those box scores included on seam heads, and we will not include them in Retro Sheet. Of course, I will include them on the Josh Gibson log where I'm going every game. Now, I'm not as bad as Mark Armour. Mark Armour is doing the same thing with Satchel Paige. He is going with Satchel Paige. What was Satchel Paige doing every game from birth till death? And it's one heck. His spreadsheet is a heck of a lot nicer looking than mine. But again, I did do each game that I could find. But the ones that weren't major league were clearly not major league. A game against the Brooklyn Bushwicks or the Red Bank Pirates or the Belmar Braves. They were exhibitions. They were not major league games. Nobody considered them major league games. It had to be a game against another Negro League team to count.
Okay, so the major league statistics that we're going to see when they finally get all integrated will only be in those games.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. That's what you're seeing now. The only issue here is seam heads and Retro Sheet continue to find more games, more newspaper articles. Newspaper.com, I don't know how many of you have used it. You go out onto newspaper.com, you find a game. It's outlined in blue. Somebody has clipped it. That somebody is Gary Ashwell of seam heads. He finds games usually before I do. Occasionally I'll find one before him, or Tom will find a game. We're all finding them. I'm hoping we have more communications between Retro Sheet, seam heads, and SABR. That's what I'm hoping to see. And Baseball Reference. We were all together at conferences this year. We all know we're all looking for the same goal.
Super. Thank you.
Let's go to Mark Hoyle in that fantastic baseball room that he's sitting in right now. Mark, how you doing tonight, man?
Doing good. I'm doing good. I only caught the tail end of this, so I don't really have a question that's going to lend anything to general conversation, but just coincidence, I have my Josh Gibson shirt on today.
I decided not to wear mine. I had it at the convention.
Yeah, I mean, I wear this quite often to a bunch of games, and I always get comments on it. I got it from Sean. It's a good way to donate to the museum and stuff like that. One question I do have you worked with Scott Simkus looking up stats and whatnot?
No.
I know he was working on some of that.
We have any number of people working with Retro Sheet. There are 4 of us involved in the Negro League process. At Seam Heads, you have Gary, and you have Kevin Johnson, you have Mike Lynch, and heaven knows who many. Adam Dworsky is very big into it at Baseball Reference, and there are any number of other people at SABR. The Malloy Conference, we have some great black baseball historians who work on things there. SABR had 3 Negro League committees that met in the early part of this year. I was on the post 1948 committee, basically because of my interest in Willie Mays. But we addressed the independent teams from 1920 to 1948. Our subcommittee recommended many of the teams that were playing as independents be considered major league, because in those Depression years, those early Depression years, the Negro leagues were really having trouble as leagues, and the teams that succeeded were the barnstorming teams.
Very good. Yeah, I'm going to have to watch this on a replay tomorrow. So thank you.
So that tells me that the pressure's on to get this rendered and put up on YouTube. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I got my ride into work. I got to listen to something.
Okay, I'll do my best. Okay. All right. Last one for tonight. Glenn Vassy, you're up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that considering all that you covered, I imagine that the numbers don't include the Mexican League, the games in Puerto Rico, and the games that were played against the semi-pro teams. So that
well, actually, my home run count includes Puerto Rico. It includes the seasons that he played in the Puerto Rican Winter League. We have very good stats from those. They're not major league, not meant to be major league. But I would not be surprised at some point that Seamheads will put the Puerto Rican Winter League numbers on their pages, and they will probably put the Dominican League from 1937 on their pages. I would not be surprised. It's an awful lot of work, an awful lot of programming for those involved in it. But Puerto Rico will be included.
Yeah, I guess the where I was going with that was just simply that 800 seems like it might even be a reasonable number.
No.
When you include the semi-pro games and whatnot.
I'm at 394, including Puerto Rico, including the semi-pro games, including everything. Okay. Very simply, my first presentation I ever did on this subject, I did it at Rhode Island meeting, Rhode Island chapter. Len lets me talk. Of course, he has his patients got sworn at some point, but he let me. And the point I made, Josh Gibson, of the 800 homers on the plaque, 400 are the results of the fertile imagination of Cumberland Posey and Gus Greenlee. They did it to publicize the team. They was routinely saying he had 70 homers in a season when he had never had more than 35. He had maybe 400 in all. I know I'm going to find more, but I'm not going to find 400 more. I might find it 6 more.
But there's no doubt the man could hit.
No doubt about it.
That's for sure. This has been fantastic.
The truth is better than the myth.
There you go. All right, next week we're going to have 2 great meetings for you folks. On Monday, September 9th, Stephen Greens will be here to give us his presentation from the Malloy Conference, Negro League Baseball Cards and Memorabilia as a Roadmap to History. And on Wednesday, September 11th, SABR's East Coast Cooperative, made up of 6 chapters here in the Northeast. We'll hear from H.R. Ryan, Vice Chair of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter and author. She'll be giving her talk, My Literary Adventures with Mark Littell. Each meeting starts at 7 p.m. Eastern and is in the SABR events calendar, so sign up today. And finally, if you like what we're doing up here, please like and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you're a baseball fan watching this, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community, offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom. SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to sabr.org/join today. Alan Cohen, you are fantastic, and this has been a great presentation. Thank you very, very much. All right. Let's get everybody out of here. We'll see you next week. Have a good night, folks.